May 2016, 3:17. Year. Old teenagers from North Carolina decided to hike part of the popular Appalachian Path in the Appalachian Mountains. It's a familiar story for these parts. The picturesque views attract thousands of tourists every year. No one could have imagined that this journey would turn into a nightmare. Their vehicle was discovered in the parking lot at the path head. The last photo on their Instagram accounts was a sunset apparently taken on the first evening of the journey, and then silence, complete silence. The families raised the alarm a few days later when the young men did not return home and stopped answering calls and messages. The investigation began. Dozens of people participated in the investigation operation, including rescuers, volunteers, and dog handlers. Helicopters combed the area from the air. They searched along the path in the woods and checked streams and ravines. But it was all to no avail. No traces. No hints. Nothing that could outbuilding light on the vanishing of the three teenagers. Time passed. Expectation faded. The case gradually became unsolved, missing without a trace. The families did not give up, continuing the investigation on their own and appealing to the media, but it was all in vain. 5 long years passed. Years of uncertainty, pain, and despair. The year was 2021. A group of speleologists was exploring a system of limestone caves not far from where the missing teenagers were last seen. These caves were not a popular tourist destination. Some passages were barely passable and required special equipment and experience. And then in one of the deep crevices, the cavers stumbled upon something strange. At first, they thought it was trash left behind by tourists, but upon closer inspection, they realized they were wrong. In the crevice lay a rolled-up tarpaulin, weighed down by a large rock. When they unfolded it, they discovered 3 separate pairs of footwear and fragments of clothing inside, clearly belonging to young people. The clothes were neatly folded. The boots were standing nearby as if someone had taken them off and placed them there. But most importantly, there were no bones, no personal belongings, no cell phones, nothing that could directly point to the missing teenagers. The cavers immediately reported their find to the police. The site was thoroughly searched. Forensic experts verified that the items discovered most likely belonged to the missing school children, but the absence of bodies left the investigation at a dead end. Why were the clothes and footwear arranged in such a way? What had happened to the teenagers themselves? There were many questions and no answers. The discovery of these items gave the case a new impetus. The police questioned local residents again and rechecked old leads, but nothing new emerged. The year was 2022. In a hospice in a small town near the Appalachian Mountains, an older man named Ray Waters was dying. He was in his 70s and suffering from a serious illness. One night, while in a semi-delirious state, he called for a nurse. What he told her shocked everyone. According to the nurse, Mr. Waters confessed that in 2016, he had done it to 3 teenagers he caught on his land. He said that he owned a piece of land not far from the very cave where the boys' clothes and footwear were later discovered. The nurse did not immediately understand what the dying older man was talking about. But when he mentioned the year and the number of teenagers, she connected it with a long, standing case of missing school children. She immediately reported this confession to the police. Detectives treated this information with caution. The confession of a dying man under the influence of medication could not be the only proof, but they decided to check this lead. Old case files were dug up. It turned out that Ray Waters did indeed own a piece of land in the area. He had even been questioned in 2016, along with other local residents. Still, at the time, his testimony had not aroused suspicion. He said he had seen nothing and noticed no one suspicious. Now, however, his confession sounded like the chilling truth. The police searched the land that had previously belonged to Ray Waters. All the buildings and the surrounding land were examined, but no human remains were discovered. It seemed that the man had taken care to conceal the proof of his offense. But the detectives had a new lead. The archives of the case file on the vanishing of the teenagers contained sealed bags of proof collected in 2016. Among them were gloves discovered near the spot where the missing teenager's vehicle had been parked. The gloves were sent for DNA analysis. The results verified the terrible truth. Traces of DNA from all 3 missing teenagers were discovered on the gloves. Ray Waters did not live to see the trial. He died in a hospice a few days after his confession. But thanks to his words and the DNA test results, the case of the 3 missing high school students was officially closed. The boys' bones were never discovered. Perhaps the mystery of their burial will remain unsolved forever. But now we know what happened to them in that fateful May of 2016. The story of 3 teenagers who went on a hike and never returned home has come to a horrific end. A man living nearby cold-bloodedly took their lives and hid their bodies so well that they have not been discovered to this day. The motive for the offense, apparently, was that he believed the teenagers had trespassed on his private land. This horrific story serves as a reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places, and that an ordinary journey to the mountains can turn into an irreparable catastrophe. Ray Waters' confession and the DNA analysis results brought the official investigation to a close. Still, for the families of the missing teenagers and the detectives who had been working on the case for 6 years, the story was far from over. Now the main question was not who, but how and why. It was necessary to reconstruct the events of that May night in 2016, and most importantly, find the bodies so that the families could finally bury their sons. Waters' death meant that he would never be able to answer these questions himself. The answers had to be sought in his past, in his home, and on his land. The police began by literally piecing together information about a man named Ray Waters. The picture that emerged was grim. He was a classic recluse, a man who had deliberately cut himself off from the world. He was in his 70s and lived alone in an old residence he had inherited. The land was large and somewhat neglected, located off the main road, almost on the border of a national park. His few locals described him as a sullen and unsociable older man. He didn't talk to anyone, avoided encounters, and reacted extremely aggressively to anyone who, in his opinion, trespassed on his land. Police records contained several complaints about Waters over the past 20 years. All of them were related to his land. He would threaten mushroom pickers who accidentally wandered onto his land with a gun or block an old woods road, claiming that it ran through his private land. One of the farmers who lived a couple of miles away told detectives that Waters had once shot his dog, which had run into his yard. The case was dismissed due to lack of proof, but everyone in the neighborhood knew it was him. Ray Waters was obsessed with his land. It was his fortress and his curse. He was not registered with a psychiatrist and had no criminal record for violent crimes. Still, his reputation was clear. He was a dangerous, unpredictable man who was best avoided. This information supported the theory that the teenagers could have fallen victim to him simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Most likely, they strayed from the official path in investigation of a better photo opportunity, crossed an invisible line, and discovered themselves in a perilous situation. After W's confession, the police obtained a warrant for the most thorough investigation of his land that was possible. This time, they weren't just looking for hints, they were looking for a burial site. Special equipment was brought to the site, including ground-penetrating radar, capable of detecting voids and anomalies in the ground. Dog handlers with dogs trained to investigation for human remains combed through the woods, fields, and ravines, belonging to Waters meter by meter. The residence itself was a depressing sight. It was old, dilapidated, with boarded-up windows on the first floor. Inside there was chaos, but it was clear that the owner had been preparing for defense. Homemade bars had been installed on the windows from the inside. The front door had been reinforced with additional bolts. The first few days of searching yielded no results. The dogs were restless, but couldn't pick up an unmistakable scent. The ground-penetrating radar showed several anomalies, but excavations revealed that these were either old tree roots or buried rubbish. It seemed that Waters had taken his biggest secret to the final resting place. However, the detectives then noticed an old outbuilding at the back of the land. It was locked with a massive barn lock. When the door was opened, a workshop was discovered inside. At first glance, it looked like a typical old farmer's workshop: tools, a workbench, and some parts. But one detail caught the attention of the forensic experts. The concrete floor in the center of the outbuilding was suspiciously fresh. It was a different color from the rest of the floor, as if a new layer of concrete had recently been poured there. Experts took samples. Under the thin top layer, they discovered old concrete stained with dark spots. Analysis showed that these were traces of blood. The blood was human. However, due to the passage of time and the chemicals that Waters had obviously used to wash away the traces, it was not possible to extract a DNA profile. Nevertheless, the discovery itself was direct proof that something terrible had happened in this barn. Next to the workbench, several metal rings were discovered embedded directly into the wall. They had microscopic fibers on them, which later, when compared, matched the fibers from the clothing discovered in the cave. It became clear that Waters had not just killed the teenagers, he had kept them in this outbuilding. Perhaps he had tortured them. The thought was monstrous, but all the proof pointed to that. In the corner of the outbuilding stood an old barrel for burning trash. Inside, among the ashes, they discovered small, melted fragments of plastic and metal. That was all that remained of their cell phones, and possibly other devices. He had methodically destroyed everything that could lead to him. However, the most significant discovery awaited the detectives in the residence. In a drawer of an old chest of drawers, under a pile of yellowed newspapers, lay a notebook. It was a journal that Waters had kept for many years. The entries were short, fragmentary, airy, and written in illegible handwriting. Most of them were about the weather, the harvest, or his dissatisfaction with his locals. But the entries for May 2016 made the blood run cold. He did not describe the murder directly, but what was written there left no doubt. Strangers on my land again. They'll never learn. The following entry was made a day later. Had to clean up. A lot of work. Need to clean out the outbuilding. And the most terrifying entry made about a week after the teenagers disappeared. Check the crevice. Everything's in place. Good spot. Quiet. Crevice. That word was the key. He knew about the cave. He didn't just stumble upon it. He used it deliberately. He hid things there to create a false path. It was a cold, calculated move. The killer wanted everyone to think that the teenagers had gotten lost, maybe fallen into the crevice, and that their bodies had been carried away by an underground river. He wanted them to investigation there, when in fact, they never left his land. The journal also contained strange notes about other places on his land. He mentioned an old well and a mine. The police threw all their resources into searching for these locations. An old well filled with rubbish and earth was indeed discovered at the edge of the land. They began to clear it out, a task that was both long and dangerous. At the same time, They searched for the abandoned mine, which was the subject of local legends, but no one knew its exact location. Reconstructing the events, detectives concluded that Ray Waters had acted with devilish cunning. He lured or forcibly dragged the teenagers into his outbuilding. No one will ever know exactly what happened there, but the ending was tragic. After that, he began to cover his tracks. He burned their personal belongings, phones, and anything that could contain GPS trackers. He neatly folded their clothes and footwear, took them to a cave he knew, and hid them, making it appear to be an accident. But he did something different with the bodies. He knew that if they were discovered on his land, it would immediately lead back to him. So he hid them somewhere else, somewhere so secure that even dogs couldn't pick up the scent. Perhaps in that same old well, or in an abandoned mine, the entrance to which he later blocked. He was a local. He knew this land like the back of his hand, all its hiding places and secrets. He turned his own land into a labyrinth of horror and death. He took the central mystery, the location of the bodies, with him to the final resting place, leaving behind only pain, questions, and cold, silent proof of his monstrous offense. The investigation continued, but with each passing day, the expectation of finding the remains faded. The work of clearing the old well on Ray Waters' land turned into a slow and grueling archaeological mission. The well was filled to the brim. For decades, Waters had dumped all kinds of debris there. Layer by layer, detectives and volunteers pulled rusty barrels, old tires, broken slate, and tons of compacted earth to the surface. Every bucket of earth was carefully sifted through. Dogs that had previously been unable to pick up a scent now circled the edge of the well, giving clear signals. This gave expectation, but the work progressed agonizingly slowly. Several times, searchers stumbled upon bones, and each time the work came to a halt in tense anticipation. Still, examination showed that these were the remains of animals that Waters had apparently also dumped in this pit. Weeks passed. The public followed the news, but there were no breakthroughs. This thread would also prove to be a dead end. But then, at a depth of about 10 uama, one of the workers' shovels struck something hard that was neither stone nor metal. Work was stopped immediately. A forensic expert descended into the pit. Carefully, centimeter by centimeter, he cleared the ground with a brush. Soon, a human bone appeared from the mud. Then another, and another. In the well, under a layer of debris and earth several meters thick, human remains were discovered. It was the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. It took several more days to recover the remains. The work was carried out with the utmost care. The forensic experts understood that the condition and position in which the bones were discovered could reveal the last moments of the teenagers' lives. The remains belonged to 3 different people. They had been thrown into the well haphazardly, with no attempt to organize the burial. Apparently, Waters threw the bodies into the pit and then began to cover them with rubbish. Numerous injuries were discovered on the bones that could not have been caused by a fall. Anthropological experts determined that there were fractures caused by a blunt object. The nature of the injuries indicated that the young people had been severely beaten before their deaths. This verified the most horrific theory about what had happened in the barn. Now the picture of the offense was complete and precise. On a May evening in 2016, 3 friends, Jackson, Miles, and Connor, looking for a beautiful view for a sunset photo, turned off the tourist path. They did not know that they had crossed the boundary of Ray Waters' private land, a man for whom that boundary was sacred. Waters most likely caught them on his land. What exactly triggered the violence, a word, a gesture, or simply their presence, will forever remain a mystery. He threatened them with a weapon, and forced them into an outbuilding. There, he tied them up, using rings in the wall, and brutally beat them. At some point, he killed them. Then began the second act of this catastrophe, the cold-blooded and methodical cover-up. Waters burned their backpacks, phones, and anything else that could contain personal information or digital traces in a barrel. Then he devised a diabolical plan to throw the investigation off track. He removed the clothes and footwear from the bodies, neatly folded them, took them to a remote cave known only to him, and hid them there, staging an accident. He figured that if the items were ever discovered, the investigation would focus on the cave system, while the bodies would be in a completely different place on his own land. And his plan worked. For 6 years, everyone believed that the teenagers had disappeared somewhere in the mountains. He dumped the bodies in an old abandoned well that he used as a dump. He knew that no one would ever voluntarily dig into that foul-smelling pit. Year after year, he continued to dump trash there, creating new layers that reliably concealed his secret. He lived his usual reclusive life a few hundred meters from the place where he had buried the 3 young people. He remained silent for 6 years, and if it hadn't been for a terminal illness that loosened his tongue in the last days of his life, the truth might never have come out. The case of the vanishing of 3 teenagers in the Appalachian was finally closed. The families were able to bury their children. Ray Waters' land, his residence and barn were demolished. The land that had been the scene of such a monstrous offense was cleared entirely. But the story of the 3 friends whose hike ended in the basement of a deranged recluse will forever remain a scar on the memory of this quiet mountain region. It is a story of how an ordinary May evening can become your last if you cross an invisible line beyond which a man who has long since lost his own is waiting for you.